Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Let's begin. Take a slow, gentle breath in through your nose. Feel the air as it softly fills your lungs, like a calm wave rising on a quiet shore. Now exhale through your mouth, letting go of any heaviness you've been holding. Let your shoulders drop just a little lower as the weight of the day begins to slide off. In this moment, there is nothing to do, nowhere to go, and nothing to hold. Take another deep inhale, letting your chest gently rise. Exhale slowly as though you are releasing a long, gentle sigh. With every breath, you are telling your body that it is safe to rest. Notice the space you are in. The soft hum of the room, the quiet air around you. Everything in this moment is here to support your relaxation. Feel the surface beneath you, holding you effortlessly. Whether you are lying in your bed, on a couch, or somewhere cozy, it cradles you fully. There is no need to hold yourself up anymore. Allow your feet to relax, noticing any small sensations there. Perhaps the warmth of a blanket, the coolness of air, or the soft touch of fabric. Let the muscles in your toes and ankles release and become heavy. Bring your awareness slowly up your legs. Your calves, your knees, your thighs, all of the muscles that worked for you today. Breathe out and imagine tension sliding down and out through your toes. Your legs become warm, heavy, and completely relaxed. Like soft sand settling into place, they rest with ease. There is nothing they need to do now but be still. Notice your hips and your lower back. This is where we often hold the invisible weight of the day. Send your next exhale there as if your breath could melt that tension away. Feel your hips settling into the surface beneath you, fully supported. Your lower back softens, letting go of any effort. Relief spreads warmly through your core as you release even more deeply. Bring your focus to your stomach and chest. Notice how they gently rise and fall with each breath. Your body moves like the slow tide of a peaceful ocean. Let your stomach soften, free from any holding. Let your chest feel open, light, and ready to receive peace. Every inhale fills you with calm. Every exhale releases what you no longer need. Turn your attention to your hands and arms. Notice if your fingers are curled or tight. With your next breath, let them soften completely. Feel your hands grow warm and heavy, resting naturally wherever they are. A wave of relaxation travels up your arms, loosening your elbows and shoulders. Your arms are heavy, loose, and at complete ease. Shift your awareness to your shoulders and neck. They've carried the invisible tasks of your day, the little stresses and postures. Exhale and imagine all that weight melting down and away. Your shoulders drop just a little lower, melting into the bed or chair beneath you. Your neck lengthens naturally, free from any strain. A soft, soothing relief spreads through this area. Now bring your attention to your face and head. Unclench your jaw, letting your tongue rest gently in your mouth. Smooth out your forehead and soften the space between your eyebrows. Let your eyelids grow heavy, even if your eyes are already closed. Imagine any lingering thoughts floating away on a gentle breeze. Your mind is soft, quiet, and ready to rest. Imagine a warm golden light above your head. It glows softly, like the last golden rays of a setting sun. Slowly it begins to flow down over you, washing away the day. It touches the crown of your head, relaxing your scalp and your mind. It glides down your face and neck, smoothing away tension. Every place this light touches becomes soft and calm. The golden light flows down your shoulders and into your arms. It moves like a gentle river, clearing away tightness. Your fingers feel loose, warm, and heavy. The light spreads to your chest and stomach, filling you with ease. Your breath is soft and natural, effortless and calm. Your body responds with a deep sense of safety and comfort. This light continues down your hips and legs. Every muscle it touches releases more deeply. By the time it reaches your toes, your entire body is glowing with tranquility. You are wrapped in a cocoon of serenity, floating in peace. Every inhale draws in calm, every exhale lets go of all that is heavy. You are fully ready to drift into rest. Now imagine yourself in a serene, dreamlike place. Perhaps you are lying in a quiet meadow beneath a soft, starlit sky. The grass is cool and soft beneath you, the air gentle and still. In the distance, you hear the faint hum of night, an owl, a rustle of leaves. The world is slow here, unhurried and safe. You are part of the stillness, completely at peace. Look up at the night sky in your mind's eye. The stars twinkle like soft lanterns, each one a peaceful thought. The moon glows gently, watching over your rest. You are cradled by the universe, safe and small in the best way. Everything is calm, everything is kind. Your body and mind are ready to drift into dreams. Let your breath guide you deeper now. Inhale a soft wave of peace. Exhale and release any last bit of tension. Your body is heavy and light all at once, perfectly balanced in comfort. Your thoughts are soft, slow, and gentle. You are safe, you are calm, you are free. Take one more slow, deep breath. And as you exhale, feel yourself fully surrender to the night. Your journey to rest has begun, and you are ready for dreams. Rest well, and enjoy tonight's bedtime story. I have always believed that rooftops are the true streets of the morning. Down below, the world rumbles and yawns through alleys and doors. But up here, on the pitch of slate and shingle, the day wakes first. You can hear it, soft as a whisker brushing glass, before anyone else does. I'm Pipkin, a small cat with a large fondness for high places and first light. My paws know every warm ridge and cool seam of the buildings on our block, every sun-baked brick and soft moss patch that keeps its own memory of rain. When the sky is still the color of a blueberry skin and the pigeons are only beginning to mutter, I slip from my window. The latch is loose, my doing, and the result of many patient evenings of watching my human June open it and then practicing with my paw when she isn't looking. I nudge the frame just enough to slide through. The sill is chilly on my belly, but the shiver is a friendly one. It means the dawn is coming. I pad onto the iron fire escape, springs creaking like sleepy grasshoppers, then up one flight, then another, and from there I leap, railing, brick lip, chimney crown, the path I could walk in my dreams. There are names for the roofs, though only I use them. The red-lipped one with a velvet slope I call the curtain. A mossy, slanted roof with the leaning weather vane is the pointing cat. The broad, sun-faded stretch with a tar scent is the skillet, and it holds the day's heat in its belly long after the sun has left. The skillet is where I go first, because the eastern edge lifts just enough for the sun to pour over without delay. I sit there and let my tail curl around my paws, the way Jun says I look like a comma, and I wait. I know the precise moment the sun begins, not when it appears, but when it decides to send a scout. At first it's the air, a loosening, a bright thread tugging lightly at my whiskers. Then the chimneys blush. Then a faint line of gold lays itself across the skillet like a ribbon set down by careful hands. This is the best moment, when the world hasn't fully decided to be awake, and I am the only witness. The light is not yet loud. It touches things as you would touch a sleeping kitten, warm, gentle, magical. Magic is a word I learned by listening. Jun uses it when she holds a little shard of mirror up so it throws a splinter of glow around the room and calls me the Moon King. She uses it when a sad plant grows new leaves. I didn't know until I started coming to the rooftops that magic is not a trick. It is a steadiness in the air, a quiet yes. The dawn does not argue with the dark. It does not push. It arrives like the warmth of June's hand when I pretend to be deeply asleep, and she rests her fingers between my shoulder blades. Sometimes I lay my head down to feel the metal warm under my chin. Sometimes I stretch so far my toes tremble with it. Sometimes the morning is so clean it makes me want to chase something just to see it move. But mostly I sit and let the first rays find me, because I have learned that if you are patient, the sun will give you its smallest secrets. In the spring, the light smells faintly of soil and the gossip of sparrows. In summer it pulses with the tiny laughter of gnats, bobbing above the tar that glitters as if sprinkled with sugar. In autumn the light has weight. It holds a story in it, as if it has traveled from far and wants to tell me about fields and old bruised apples. In winter the sun is a brave coin. When I hold my paws in it, it sinks slow and bright into them, and I am a little richer. I did not plan to catch a sunbeam. I am not a planner, not in the way June is when she draws boxes on paper and fills them with words like mortgage and call mom and remember basil. My plans are simpler. Find the warm laundry basket, nap until the clock rings, take 2 olives from the kitchen counter while June is reading recipes aloud. But certain ideas arrive the way pigeons do, landing where they feel most welcome. This one came on a morning when the sky was the color of clean milk, and the slant of the light was so pure it made every edge of everything look freshly sharpened. I had just traced my usual route from the skillet to the pointing cat and then over the curtain. The curtains below that roof belong to Mrs. Casilda, who sews dresses for the neighborhood and keeps pins in a little cushion shaped like a tomato. I have studied that tomato cushion for months and have concluded it might be a real fruit that sprouted metal trees. June says no, pins don't grow. I am unconvinced. Something on the curtain caught the light and flashed. I squinted. It wasn't a pigeon's eye or a bottle cap. It was a glass jar, round as a puffer fish and striped with sunlight. It had been set near a crooked terracotta pot where nothing grew. Perhaps Mrs. Casilda had left it there after her dinner party, or the wind had nudged it along the sill until it landed in that corner. I sniffed the wind. The jar smelled like apricot jam that once lived inside it, and like the quiet dust that gathers under couches. I had played with beams once or twice, pouncing on them when June's phone reflected, or reaching for the bright dot that shivered on the wall when a car went by. Those lights always slipped away before I could get both paws on them. But here, the morning was not a tricksy spark. It was a steady ribbon sliding across the roof tile and into the open mouth of that jar. Curiosity is a ladder. I climbed it, paw over paw, without thinking. I crossed the little ravine between roofs where Mr. Loris the watchmaker keeps his dish of water for the rooftop birds. I nodded to the weather-vane cat, who maintains a dignified silence. I approached the jar and peered in. The light sat inside it like a calm gold cat, curled but awake, watching me. No, I told myself, because sometimes I must be the sensible one. This is a reflection. Glass does that. But when I leaned over, the beam did not slip across the surface and vanish. It stayed. It glowed with a quiet sound. If sound could be seen, it would look like that. And the rim of the jar warmed my nose. I placed a paw on the side. The glass hummed with sunlight. When I shifted my body between the jar and the sun, expecting darkness, The jar dimmed but did not go out. The light within was its own little lantern. I sat down hard as if a gentle hand had pushed my back. The world tilted wonderfully. A pigeon nearby made a puzzled burr, as if asking whether I had finally understood something it had always known. I lifted the jar carefully in my paws and, with a hop and a scramble, carried it to a patch of shade behind a chimney stack to test it. The sunbeam inside didn't leave. It hovered, whole and unto itself, like an egg yolk. I am not a scientist, though I admire Mr. Loris when he wipes his glasses and leans over the small bodies of watches, listening to their ticking hearts. But I do know when something is strange and excellent. I poked my head around the chimney to find the spill of sun once more. I brought the jar back into it, careful not to tip, and watched the little glow inside brighten as if it had taken a deep breath. The beam licked the glass like cream. With my heart tapping high and quick, I tried an experiment of my own. I found another jar. Well, first I had to find it. There was a stack of oddments near the stairwell hatch. A cracked pot, a coiled wire, 3 corks, and at the bottom of a cardboard box that smelled like oranges and attic, a smaller jar, the kind Jun uses for loose screws that grow out of furniture. I put my mouth around it and carried it like a kitten back to the sunlit strip. Now I had 2 jars. The first, which glowed as if it held the heart of a bee. The second, which waited with its mouth open like a surprised fish. The sun lay on the roof patiently. I set the second jar in the beam and watched. The light slid in easily, like bread into a basket. It filled the round belly of the jar and settled. So I capped it. With what? There was no lid. I tested an idea and placed one of the corks gently against the opening. The glow did not push it away. It accepted the soft stopper as a cat accepts a new cushion. I canted my head and admired. 2 jars of morning, both warm and golden, sat side by side like twin hearths. When you discover a new toy, you want to show it off. When you discover a new kind of quiet, you want to protect it. I felt both feelings, but the second one was the larger. Some things are better when they don't have to prove themselves to everybody. June likes to invite friends over and turn music on low, and the house fills with laughing and the clink of glasses, and I waltz quietly behind the couch, sampling ankles. That joy is wide and noisy. But there is another joy that is thin and sturdy, like a string that holds you to the world. That is the joy I felt now. I could gather sunbeams. I could keep them safe. At first, my paws were too excited for the work. I wanted to race from roof to roof, to collect every slant and fleck of light, to coax them into jars, to see them make a small, starry city around me. But even a discovery has its manners. The sun is not a sack of flour. You cannot scoop it until the shelf is empty. I slowed myself with a long, deliberate lick of the chest, the way an older cat might to show you how to be decent. I looked around. Where would I keep what I gathered? Where would they be safe from wind and weather and curious raccoons? There is a place between Mrs. Casilda's chimney and the pointing cat's base where the bricks bow slightly inward, making a narrow cave, dry even in rain. In summer, I like to nap there and think about nothing, which is something I am very good at. I padded over and tested the space with the first jar. It fits snugly, with a little breathing room that made a small halo on the bricks above. The second jar fit too. The niche felt like a pocket in a careful coat. "All right," I told the sun, as one professional to another. "I will take only what you offer easily." I made a game of it then. I placed an open jar where the beam was softest. I watched until the glass pulsed with a subtle glow. Then I slid the cork on, snug but not tight, because I sensed that light needs a little air, the way bread dough needs a draft to sigh into. I carried each jar to the pocket and set it inside. After a while there were 4, then 6, then 8 in a neat little family, each with its own personality. One held a straight thought beam, calm and unwavering. One had the playful shimmer of light that bounced off Mr. Loris's water dish. Another looked like it had captured the breath right before a bird takes off, ready to lift anything that came close. The jars warmed the bricks around them until the whole niche became a cozy hearth. I curled nearby, not sleeping exactly. My ears were too full of morning for that, but humming with the simple sound of being where I was meant to be. It would be easy to say I had a reason for gathering them beyond the pleasure of discovery. The truth is, the reason came after. It is like kneading. You push and push because it feels good, and then you realize you have made something soft and useful. I remembered rainy days when June's shoulders slumped and she took the long way to laughter. I remembered nights when the boiler clanked and the apartment kept the cold close. I thought about the small boy on the 3rd floor who carries a book with a dragon on it, and sometimes sits on his windowsill with a blanket over his knees, staring at the clouded sky as if it owes him a patch of blue. I thought about myself, about the times when the dark rooms made my fur lift for no reason at all, and a warm square on the floor was the only thing that quieted me. If I could keep these sunbeams safe, I could bring them downstairs when they were needed. A bit of morning in a jar for a sick plant, a teaspoon of light for a bad dream, a full belly of dawn for a winter afternoon that forgot what warmth was. The idea rang inside me like a bell. Still, I am careful. I have watched humans make the same mistake over and over with treasures. They show them to everyone too quickly. So I kept my jars to myself that first day. I did not crowd them. I touched the corks with my nose, felt their gentle warmth, and then sat in the open sun again, grateful for the large, generous version of what I was learning to keep in small. "Pipkin," a voice floated up from below, as if the building itself had meowed. It was Jun, of course, in the kitchen, opening the tin of the salmon pâté that me and my dignity have a complicated relationship with. I glanced at my collected sunlight. It sat quietly, as if it had dimmed to a purr just for me. I felt a thrill run from my nose to my tail tip. My jars would be there when I returned. They would be patient, They were made of the same patience that opens each day. I sprang from roof to roof, pausing only once to look back. The niche by the chimney looked like a tiny shrine. The corks reminded me of little hats. I touched the weather-vane cat's metal paw in passing, a secret handshake, and slithered down the fire escape to my window. June was leaning out of it, scanning the alley. Her hair was in a nest on top of her head, and she wore the sweater with a hole the size of a coin that I like to poke my paw through. Her smile when she saw me was truly sunlight. "There you are," she said. "Back from your morning kingdom, Your Majesty." I brushed under her chin, which is the softest place in the world, and then I let her lift me. I am not a small cat, but I pretend to be smaller when she does this, tucking my paws and curling my tail politely. The apartment smelled like coffee and toast and last night's books. June scratched between my ears and asked about my adventures in a language made of questions she doesn't expect answers to. I answered anyway, with a long murr-row that meant, "It is not all pigeons and dust up there. There is a new thing, June. There is a new task." Later, when she went out with her tote bag and her list of squares to fill, I returned to the rooftops. The day had brightened into full coin, clattering along gutters and making windows laugh. I checked my nook. The jars were waiting. Their glow softened the way a candle flame looks in a room that's already light. I took one out and brought it to the shade to see if the contained dawn still remembered itself. It did. A breath of warmth kissed my whiskers. The color inside the glass held steady, not the entreating yellow of midday, but the milky gold of beginnings. I carried one to Mr. Loris's water dish and held it above the surface. The light inside the jar rippled as if it knew its own reflection. The water glowed faintly for a second, and a sparrow landed, cocked its head, and dipped its beak with an appreciative chirp. I did not uncork it, not yet. This was just to introduce my jars to the world, like kittens meeting the other pets in the house through a door. When I put the jar back, a thought arrived, persistent as a raindrop that insists on the same spot on your nose. What if the jars did not last forever? What if their contents thinned into the same general light as everything else? I lifted one of the corks and held my breath. The glow inside leaned toward the opening like a cat sniffing at a crack. A thread of warmth touched my nose, curious, tender. I set the cork back quickly, heart clicking. I didn't want to waste what I had gathered without a true need. So I made a set of rules because even cats make rules when the game is good. First, only gather at dawn when the sun is new and gentle. Second, never take more than fits easily into one jar, and never too many jars for one day. Third, store them where they will not be knocked, and look in on them the way you look in on sleeping kits, quietly, ready to leave them untouched. Fourth, keep them secret until you are certain you can share them well. It is not in our nature to write rules down, but I have a way to remember. I wove them into my path. I would not step onto the skillet without whispering the first rule to myself. I would not cross the pointing cat without counting my jars with a slow blink for each. I would not pass Mrs. Casilda's chimney without tapping the brick at the edge of the niche, a pledge to be gentle. And when I walked the curtain's ridge, which is as narrow as a single sardine, I would practice thinking of someone who needed light. June, the small boy with the dragon book, the lonely plant, and place that thought in my chest like a cork, firmly, with care, able to be lifted when it was time. The day grew and leaned into itself. Heat rose and the city sounded louder, like a violin becoming a full orchestra. I lay in my niche, watching ants involve themselves with a speck of something beside my paw. A cloud drifted over the sun, and for a moment the above world slipped into a softer shadow. In the corner of my eye, 8 small suns kept shining. That was when I knew for certain the jars were not an accident of glass and angle. They were a promise. They were the part of morning that could be carried forward. I thought about rain and the way it sometimes keeps the city inside itself for days. I thought about thunder that makes even me flatten my ears. I thought about the first snow, which is beautiful from a window, and less beautiful when your paws meet the sharp places underneath. I thought about the dark that arrives too early in winter and stays too late in the morning, and how even June sometimes looks at the door like she is trying to remember how to open it. I purred, a low, willing sound, and pressed closer to my collection. Evening, when it came, poured down like tea. I visited each jar before I went inside, nose to cork, whisker to warm glass. I did not say goodbye because I felt the sun's patience under my paw. Instead I said, tomorrow, which is the best sort of promise, one you can keep just by waking. I finished my rounds and slipped back to my window, where Jun had left the latch a little looser than before. She noticed then. She always does. That night, after I had made certain June's toes were safe from terrible dreams and had inspected the bathroom for intruders, none, unless you count the washing machine's ghost, I leapt up to the sill to look out. The city had gone quiet under its dark hat. In the distance, a single window stayed lit. I imagined how my jars would look if I opened one now and poured a little dawn into the room, a bright puddle the size of a saucer, a warm band across a sleeping shoulder. Not yet, I told myself, but soon, when it is needed. My tail curled in a ring around me, a small moon keeping a small world steady. Somewhere above, my sunbeams waited in their glass bellies, patient, ready. I closed my eyes and listened to the apartment, the little breath Jun takes when she turns over, the hum in the wall that means the building is thinking, my own purr turning itself down like a dimmer switch. I've always loved rooftops. I always will. But now I loved them for another reason. Not just because they let me be the first to feel the day find its feet. Not just because they smell like stories and toast. But because they had given me a new job. I am Pipkin. The rooftops are my morning streets, and tucked into a chimney's pocket, in 8 little glass bellies, I am keeping the sun safe. Rooftops are like stairs laid out for the sky, and once I learned their pattern, I wanted more of them. Higher, farther, the ones with the cold spines and the ones that warmed like toast. Dawn made me greedy in a careful way. I still took only what the morning gave easily, but I began to go looking for where it gave the most. I refined my route the way June refines her coffee, methodically, with a lot of sniffing. The skillet first, always the skillet, because it was honest about the day and would tell me if clouds were hiding just out of sight. Then the pointing cat, whose weather-vane tail clicked faintly and gave advice without words. From there, a brick lip to a gutter to a chimney crown, and then a long, sinuous path up to the old theater roof with the carved masks and the copper rain chain that sings when a breeze fusses it. If I timed my jumps with the sun's climb, I could meet the first rays at each new height the second they spilled over edges, chased between chimneys and windows, thin as ribbons you could lick. The higher roofs are tricksters. The wind speaks louder. Pigeons hold meetings I'm not invited to. There was one roof, steep, slate, green at the seams, that I named the grasshopper because I had to make 3 little leaps in a row to clear the angle, and the sound of my claws on the slate was like a grasshopper clacking its legs together. I learned to flatten myself, feel the angle under my belly, and listen for the sigh that meant the sun was about to clear the factory's smokestack. The light would spill through the gap between smokestack and sky like cream through teeth. I always felt a small, urgent joy when that happened, the way I do when Jun drops a wool sock and I get there first. Chimneys make alleyways of gold. Windows make lakes of it. I chased both. A beam will behave differently depending on who is nearby. Between 2 brick stacks, the light stretches long and serious, as if it is on its way to work. Against window glass, it squats and puddles, lazy as a cat loaf. I learned the feel of each kind under my whiskers. The long, serious ones warm your spine slowly, exactly along the bones, like a hand smooth with soap. The puddled ones kiss you in wide patches and make your tail want to curl around your own ankle. I gathered better when I paid attention to these manners. I would set my jar with its open mouth in a narrow spill, and the light would pour itself in like a promise. I would set it in a window lake, and the jar would drink in a round mouthful that felt less like a stream and more like a held breath. I didn't rush. I learned that the sun has a pace that can't be hurried by eager pause. By the 3rd morning of my new routine, I realized my chimney pocket was too small for what my careful greed wanted to keep. 8 jars fit there like kittens in a basket. 9 was trouble. 10 was impossible. Wind worries, raccoon fingers, rain sneaks, too many dangers. And also there was a tug in me. I wanted to be closer to them at night, to sit near them while the world downstairs clicked off its lamps. A secret is more truly yours when it lives where you sleep. We do not have an attic, not officially. We have something Jun calls the crawl space. It begins where the hallway ceiling outside our apartment dips down and ends in a small trapdoor that has always been a private fascination of mine. The door smells like dry wood, forgotten winter scarves, and a whisper of cedar from a long-ago box. June only opens it once a year for a ritual I have titled The Battle of the Fan, in which she puts a rattling box with blades back into hiding. I have tried many times to put myself into that crawl space. The door requires thumbs. My paws are clever, but not thumbed. However, June never could resist a curious cat for long. The next time she opened it, she did so slowly and said, "You want to look?" as if I hadn't been asking for seasons. I looked. The dark was not unfriendly. It was the kind of dark that keeps its own gentle counsel. After my discovery of the jars, the crawl space began to feel like the right kind of attic. Mine. Not a dusty place to forget things in, but a quiet place to keep them safe. I memorized the hinges' squeak. I practiced timing. I tested how far my paw could nudge the panel from the hallway molding when no one was looking. Far enough with a satisfying thunk. I stole a felted furniture pad from the bottom of a chair and stuck it to the edge so the panel would close without telling on me. In the mornings after June left with her tote bag and hopeful lists, I would scale the stair railing, push the panel with my shoulder, and slip into a room that wasn't a room yet. Air in an attic tastes different. It tastes like pages, even if there aren't books. This one tasted like old summer saved up. The rafters smelled like a pencil case. A thin beam from a cracked vent made a pale stripe across insulation that looked too much like bread to be fully trusted. In the wedge-shaped corner closest to our apartment wall, there was a stable line of joists where a soft-footed cat could walk without falling through and becoming a short, tragic anecdote. I claimed that corner the way we claim everything, by becoming very still in it until it decides to belong to us. I brought up boxes one at a time in my mouth. They were light, the kind June buys when she says she is going to become very organized, and then uses for exactly 2 things before forgetting she owns them. One box had shoe pictures printed on it. Another had a glossy picture of a smiling boy on a bicycle. I batted these to the corner and bit their flaps into neat folds. I lined them along the joists like thin shelves. I felt useful in that precise way that makes your whiskers perk forward. This was a library being built by paws. Getting the jars from the rooftops to the attic was a careful operation. I could not carry more than 1 at a time. I refused to rush. I made each trip like a ceremony, jar from chimney niche to skylight ledge. We do not have a skylight, but Mrs. Casilda does, and I have deputized it. Jar from skylight ledge to fire escape landing. A pause to listen for downstairs noises that might spell June opening the door and asking questions with her eyebrows. Then the hallway dash, which is faster if you flatten your ears and carry your tail like a little flag for balance. Then the stair rail walk and the shoulder shove of the panel and the slide into my attic that was not officially an attic. Setting a jar onto a box shelf with my paw under it to keep the glass from kissing wood too loudly is a satisfaction I recommend to anyone with a paw. The jar would contact the cardboard and give a tiny tick, like a watch saying yes. I would nudge it until it sat just right, back from the lip, not touching the joist, turned so the cork's little scar, a dent from where my teeth held it, faced forward like a label. Then I would go get another. By noon on the first day of transport, I had a row of 6 jars lined up in my attic corner. I sat with them until the sun moved away from the vent crack and left us in a pale afternoon that felt like a held breath. The jars glowed softly of their own accord. They weren't bright. They weren't trying. They were like sleeping cats with their eyes half open, aware, content. I named them in my head the way one names clouds: quiet honey, porch lantern, tea steam, milk gold, bread crust, sparrow wing. The names were wrong and right at the same time. That added to the pleasure. When evening came, I discovered a new trick. I had always loved the time when lamps below our windows flick on one by one, like stones across a river. From the attic, the world is even quieter. June rustled pages. A couple in the next building argued softly about whether a couch could be called new after someone had already sat on it. The city hummed its big, patient hum. I lay with my chin on the joist and watched my jars in the half-dark. They did something I can only call trembling, not shaking, not shivering like a cold. Trembling like a song you can't hear but can feel in your chest. Their light had corners at dawn. At night it rounded itself. It touched the inside of each jar and made it glow as if the glass remembered the hands that had made it. I made a habit of this. Morning, chase, gather, carry. Noon, line, label, watch. Evening, sit and let the row of jars be a very low constellation, a soft golden library of light. It was fun. Fun deserves the right word. People use fun for many things. This was the kind with no edges, like when you find a sun square on the floor and it fits your whole body exactly. I would sometimes paw at the cardboard so the jars chimed against each other very gently, and when they did, the glow would ripple from one to the next, like the way a purr moves through a line of kittens nursing. A swell, then a settle. I began to make categories. This is what you do with a library. I had gathered beams I called first sip, those that arrive before the sun itself shows, pale and patient and excellent for warming the tip of your nose. I had clear, clean beams that I called window bread, good for making edges look new. I had fat, slow beams that pooled like melted butter where they fell. These I called puddle light. I had one rare jar that held a beam that had come through leaves on the sycamore by Mr. Loris's window, and it made a tiny, dappling pattern on the cardboard whenever I lifted its cork to let it breathe. I called that one leaf coin. I put dots on the boxes with my claw. 1 dot for first sip, 2 for window bread, 3 for puddles, 4 for leafed. I was a librarian and everything obeyed me. At first I meant only to admire them. Watching is a very fine occupation, but watching without touching when there are jars full of patient mornings sitting at your elbow is like staring at a closed door you know leads to a room where the floor is warm. I swore I wouldn't waste any. I promised I would use them only when a real need came along. That promise stood. However, I allowed myself experiments. Little sips, little lid lifts, very practical tests with the seriousness of a watchmaker who talks to springs. I learned that a jar sang, quietly, if you touched your nose to the cork and hummed. The sound the jar made depended on its beam. First, sip jars answered in a small high note, like a teacup tapped with a spoon. Puddle light hummed back at you with a sound like a nap. Leaf coin whispered like an insect's wings. When I lifted a cork, I held it above the opening and let the light lick the underside once, just once, and then sealed it again. The corks warmed, but the jars did not complain. One evening I carried a small jar down to the bedroom. Jun had left the curtains open a sliver, and a thin city light laid itself across the bed like a ribbon. I sat on the dresser and lifted the cork, a tiny ribbon of dawn, no larger than the paw pad on my left forefoot, curled up and out and rolled itself onto the quilt. For a moment the quilt looked like morning. It smelled faintly like toast. Then the ribbon folded itself back toward the jar mouth like a shy guest thanked for coming, and slid inside as I lowered the stopper. It had left behind the memory of warmth, like a thought you can still feel after you've had it. I was giddy and serious at once. The experiment had worked. I purred so loudly June turned over and said my name in her sleep. I stowed the jar under the bed and retrieved it when she slept deeper, returning it to the attic with my heart in my mouth in case it decided to stay downstairs forever. It did not. It followed my intention like a string. On a rainy morning, I tried something bolder. The day had the sullen face rain sometimes gets, and the light had the wet paper quality of a newspaper left on a doorstep. My gathering was small. A good librarian accepts slim pickings. Back in my attic, I set a little jar labeled with 2 claw dots beside a pot of basil that Yoon had optimistically placed on the sill and then apologized to each evening for neglecting. The basil wore a droop like a hat you have to carry with your head because your hands are full. I lifted the jar's cork and let the window bread beam breathe. The basil stood up a little. Not a lot, not a miracle. Just a small undrooping, the botanical equivalent of believing in yourself again. I corked the jar. The basil and I said nothing. Humans make speeches to plants. Cats and basil just become slightly less dramatic together. There were failures worth respecting. I tried pouring a thin smear of light into my water dish, thinking it would turn the drinking into something like swallowing a warm cloud. The light sank to the bottom of the dish and made a trembly coin that refused to be scooped by my tongue. It stared up at me as if waiting for a better idea. I pushed the dish into the shadow and waited. The coin did not dissolve. It held like a penny glued to a sidewalk. The next morning, when the room was real morning again, the coin soaked itself into the air and left the dish looking like any dish. I decided I would not feed light to water again. They were friends already. They didn't need me to introduce them. The attic's row grew. I added another shelf box, then another. 3 rows now, then 4, each jar labeled by cork dent and mental name. I learned to stack the time of my gathering. Early beams at the back, softer, evening-minded ones toward the lip, because sometimes I like to sit with the jar called porch lantern closest. That one made the attic smell like a hand just after it's been warmed against a mug. Some afternoons I forgot to be a cat and simply became a librarian. I sat and calculated without numbers. I sorted. I nudged a jar one whisker width to the left and felt like I had solved a puzzle. I rearranged the leaf coins so their dapples overlapped and made little fish swim on the cardboard when I breathed on them. I set 3 jars touching each other and lifted their corks a thread, and the tiny breaths that escaped mingled and made a 4th smell I couldn't name, like warm enamel or the moment before a cookie breaks. I was not wasting them. I was rehearsing for a question I hadn't yet asked out loud. At night, my attic library turned my secret corner into a soft city. I took to visiting it before bed, after making certain June's toes were clear of monsters, none on weeknights, and the washing machine ghost had no intention of clanking. It always has intentions. Ghosts are boring that way. I would climb, slip the panel, settle. The jars would pulse faintly the way kittens breathe after they've had a good cry and forgotten whatever scared them. I felt like the keeper of something. Cats love being keepers of anything. You've seen us with cardboard boxes and doorways and patches of sunlight. But this keeping felt bigger than my usual territorial enthusiasm. It felt like a job I had given myself, not because it made me grand, but because it made me steadier. "What will I do with you?" I asked softly one night, my nose almost touching the cork of quiet honey. The jar answered with its teacup note, which I could feel in my whiskers but not hear with my ears. It wasn't a do kind of answer. It was a be kind of answer. Still, the question sat in me afterward like a warm stone. I thought of the small boy with the dragon book. He had sat on the sill in his apartment 2 afternoons in a row, not reading, just looking out as if the sky were being selfish. I thought of Mrs. Casilda when a dress went wrong, how she would pinch the fabric at her chin and murmur, "No, no," like a smoothing spell. I thought of Mr. Loris when he cleaned a watch, the tenderness with which he turned the tiny screws as if they could hear him. I thought of June, who sometimes stood in the kitchen and put her hand on the counter and just breathed as if she wanted the room to give her permission to be tired. You cannot solve everything with a jar, but those pictures made my tail twitch with a curious certainty. The jars were more than fun, more than a quiet trick. They were stored gentleness. They were mornings I could deliver like letters. That was when the ritual began to write itself into my bones. Dawn, rooftops, chase. Place the jar mouth under the beam that wanted to fall into it. Cork, carry, librarian in the afternoon. Watch, arrange, hum a note, and listen for the reply. Evening, the soft sparkle as the city's lamps lit and my jars made their own, private dawns on the shelves. I climbed higher rooftops because higher rooftops hold new kinds of light. I found a spire I hadn't seen before behind the bakery, with a little iron cat at the top whose ears were rusted but whose face stayed brave. The ledge just below it was narrow, no wider than a sardine open lengthwise. I crouched, felt my back legs turn into springs, and leapt to it, pulling myself up with 4 paws in a sort of careful indignity. The view from there was ridiculous and wonderful. The sun found me without courtship and put its whole palm on my head. A new beam poured down, thin but fierce, pale peach like the inside of a shell. I caught it. The jar held it like a secret you tell to yourself. I named it Shell Thought and placed it on the top shelf later because it seemed to want to look down at the others. On a different morning, fog decided to be the whole city. Fog is a cat in its own right, self-satisfied, a little rude, very good at sitting where you need to be. I didn't expect to gather at all, but then I discovered that fog and light make together a kind of milk. It doesn't pour, it settles. I held a jar to where the fog brightest did near a street lamp that had forgotten to sleep. The jar filled with a round, diffuse glow that warmed my claws through the glass. I named it Lamp Milk and put it on the shelf with the puddle lights. It didn't so much sparkle in the evenings as sort of exhale. That was good too. Not all light has to be loud about it. Days slide past when you count them by rooftops. I learned the sounds of the neighborhood at first light. The cough of the bus that never wants to start. The pigeons' low conversations. A baker's sneeze that was always 3 in a row. The whistle of a kettle in an apartment where someone read poems out loud to a cat with an offended voice. I learned where the sun threw itself first on Saturdays, and which windows always blinked open later than the rest. I followed beams like you follow a scent across a carpet, certain of what it is, curious about where it will lead. My row became 2 rows, then 3, then something that deserved the word library without any decoration. The shelves were a little crooked. The cardboard occasionally softened in damp weather and had to be replaced with a fresh box I thoughtfully liberated from a hallway recycling stack when June wasn't looking. I kept a chart in my head. I could tell you where any jar belonged with my eyes closed by the shape of my whiskers when the jar's light answered my hum. Sometimes, when I sat there, the question swelled inside me again. What will I do with so many jars of sunlight? The attic did not answer. The jars answered only by being themselves. The world below provided hints. Someone cried in the alley one night, not loud, more like a faucet left on. June went to the door and stood there listening, and then shut it again slowly because sometimes listening is the only kindness you can give a stranger. A power line popped one evening, and a corner of the street went out with a sound like a frying egg. And for an hour the buildings on that corner looked like they had forgotten their faces. The basil did better, then worse, then better. The boy with the dragon book appeared one afternoon with a cast on his arm and watched the clouds as if he'd been personally wronged. Mr. Loris taped a paper sign to his shop that said, "Back in 10," and then forgot to come back for 20. And when he did, he laughed at himself and shook his head gently. All those things stacked themselves in me like jars on a shelf. They were not yet a plan. They were shelves with labels waiting to be written. I did not rush them, but at night, when my attic glowed and my paws tucked themselves into my own fur, the picture that came sometimes was not of my shelves, but of a jar being carried somewhere else. down a quiet stair, across a yard I had not yet walked, onto a windowsill where a small, important sadness sat with its knees up. The cork would lift. A ribbon of mourning would slide out and form itself into exactly the size of the need. It would not fix a broken bone or pay a bill or reroute a bus. It would say, "Here is the feeling of the day beginning. Try this." Who would I be if I did such a thing? Cats are already creatures people put their wishes on. "Be lucky for me," they say. "Sit here so I can be still. Stay by the door and keep the bad things outside." We do our best. Adding jars to that job felt like making a small store of yes that I could take where no had gotten too comfortable. I curled tighter around that thought. It warmed my middle the way the skillet warms my sides at dawn. One more discovery before sleep took me that night. If I set 2 jars very close, leaf coin and tea steam, and turned their cork scars toward each other, the glow between them made a thin line on the joist that looked like writing, not letters. I don't know letters, though I can pick out the shape of my name if June draws it in air with her finger and says it in the soft voice. This line was its own language. I touched it with my paw and it didn't smudge. I held my paw there and my pads warmed as if the line were telling me something meant just for me. I don't know what the story wants next. That is not my job. My job is to climb when climbing is smart, to gather when gathering is kind, to keep what I've gathered with care, and to look at the world with my good eyes. I am a cat of rooftops. I am a librarian of light. And lately, as I sit with my rows and their small, patient trembling, another feeling visits me at the edge of purr and breath. Readiness. Like the lift of a bird just before it goes. Like a doorknob turned halfway. Like a jar held above a windowsill, the cork loose, the sunbeam inside awake and listening for its name. It has been a week since I've seen the sun. The rooftops I usually patrol at dawn wear nothing but heavy gray coats, dripping steadily with rain. I tried climbing them the first morning, my paws slipping on the wet slate, whiskers damp with drizzle. The air smelled like old wool and wet stone. The beams I usually chase between chimneys and windows never came. There were no ribbons, no puddles of gold, no soft laughter of morning light, just a thick sky, sulking. At first I thought it was only my disappointment to carry, but cats are good at listening to the mood of a town. By the second day, I could hear it everywhere. The baker, he usually whistles when he sets trays out, filling the air with buttery hope. Now he sighed so often I began to count them. Sighs between needs, sighs between loaves, sighs heavy enough to fog the glass of his window. His bread still baked, but without the puff of joy it usually had. Mrs. Casilda, the seamstress, worked beneath a lamp with a weak bulb. It flickered, and she leaned close to her cloth, her eyes tired. Her window was usually a square of glowing gold at dusk, a lantern for the block. Now it was a smudge of dim light, half-hearted. Her scissors made dull snips, like they too had grown weary without sun to sharpen them. And the children, the children. They normally raced up and down the cobbled alleyways with dragon voices and skipping ropes, but now they lingered on stoops with drooping knees, their laughter gone quiet. One boy pressed his forehead to the rain-fogged glass of a window, his toy boat idle in a bowl of water. A girl stared at a chalk drawing that the rain had half erased. Its bright colors melted into puddles. The whole neighborhood felt like a blanket that had lost its warmth. That's when I remembered. The jars. My glowing library in the attic. The soft rows of captured dawn, humming quietly in their glass bellies. At night, when I curled among them, they had trembled with gentle light, golden even in the deepest dark. I had thought of them as a secret treasure, a joy only for me. But perhaps they had always been waiting for this. A spark ran through me, sharper than any chill rain. Excitement. The kind that makes your tail puff out and your paws knead the air before you even realize it. What if I shared the light? I hurried up to the attic, the crawl space I had claimed as my hidden room. My shelves of cardboard and boxes waited faithfully, each jar standing proud, its corked top like a little crown. They glowed faintly even in the day's gloom, as if they knew the sun was missing and had volunteered to keep shining in its place. I padded along the rows, purring at each one like a librarian checking her shelves. Quiet honey, porch lantern, sparrow wing, milk gold, all of them trembling softly, patient and bright. They looked like hope wearing glass. Yes, the neighborhood needed them. The question was how. I tested with one jar, small and steady. Window bread, captured on a bright morning when the light poured straight into Mrs. Casilda's window. I nudged the cork loose, carrying the jar carefully in my teeth. It glowed against my fur, warming my whiskers. When I leapt down to the hallway and padded toward the seamstress's window, my paws thudded with purpose. Her shop was gloom itself, gray light and dull shadows. She bent over her cloth, squinting. I hopped onto her sill, nose twitching. With a swift motion, I set the jar down and eased the cork off. A ribbon of golden light unrolled like a fresh bolt of fabric. It spilled across her work table, gliding over her scissors and cloth. The gray dimness pulled back like a curtain. Her tired eyes widened. "Oh," she breathed, and for the first time in days, her voice carried a note of wonder. The glow lingered on her cloth, softening the colors, making them sing again. She pressed her hand to it, whispering, "How lovely." I purred, watching from the sill. When the light settled into the jar again, dim but still glowing, I corked it quickly. My tail flicked with satisfaction. One neighbor already lighter. Next was the baker. His shop smelled of flour and melancholy. He leaned on the counter, chin in his hand, staring at loaves that seemed denser than usual. I set a jar, puddle light, by the tray of rolls. When I pulled the cork, the light slid out like melted butter, flowing over the bread. The crusts gleamed golden, warm and welcoming. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and then smiled faintly. perfect color," he murmured. He lifted one roll to his nose, inhaling as if the scent carried back all the mornings he loved. His sigh, this time, was not heavy, but relieved. The children were trickier. They sat in the alley, poking at puddles without joy. I carried 2 jars, leaf coin and tea steam. When I lifted the corks, soft dapples of sunlight spilled out, scattering across the wet cobbles. The rain still fell, but the light turned every drop into a sparkling bead. The puddles glimmered like tiny lakes of treasure. The children gasped. One boy leapt up, laughing, pointing at the cobblestones that suddenly danced with golden freckles. A girl held out her hand to catch a raindrop, giggling when it shone like a jewel. Their play returned in bursts, shouts of delight bouncing between the walls. They didn't question it. They accepted magic easily, the way only children and cats know how. By evening, I had shared light with half the block. Each time I returned the jars to my attic, careful not to drain them fully. They still glowed, a little dimmer perhaps, but content. The attic itself felt proud, glowing like a secret sun. When night fell, the rain still tapped at windows, but the gloom had softened. The baker hummed again as he cleaned his counter. Mrs. Casilda worked late into the night with her cloth glowing warmly. Children fell asleep with smiles, dreaming of golden puddles. I curled among my jars, their trembling light wrapping me in warmth. My whiskers twitched with satisfaction. The town had been gray, but I had given it back a little dawn. And for the first time I thought, perhaps this is what I was meant to do all along, not just to collect, not just to keep, but to share. I never thought my paws would be trusted to carry something as precious as morning itself. But here I was, Pipkin, rooftop wanderer, collector of dawn, padding carefully through the neighborhood with jars clinking softly in my mouth, as though I carried bottled happiness. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed on rooftops, pattered against windows, and filled gutters with cold gray streams, but I was not discouraged. My attic still shimmered with rows of captured sun, waiting. I had tested their glow in quiet experiments, but now I felt certain it was time to share them properly, not just as a whim, but as gifts. The baker's shop came first. His sighs had been a steady rhythm all week, heavier than the thud of dough on his counter. I slipped through the back, where sacks of flour leaned like tired shoulders. The air was thick with yeast and damp. He rubbed his temples, staring at loaves that looked as dreary as the sky. I set down my chosen jar, porch lantern, a beam that had once curled over a doorway at dusk, soft and homely. The cork gave a gentle pop when I nudged it off. The light poured out like melted gold, flowing across the shelves, kissing the bread until it shone. The baker blinked once, then twice, as if unsure whether his weary eyes were playing tricks. Then his face broke into something rare that week, a smile. "Well, look at you," he murmured, staring at me on the flour-dusted floor. "A little cat with—" "Sunshine?" I purred. pleased he understood without needing explanations. He leaned closer, letting the glow warm his cheeks. For the first time in days, he hummed, not loudly, but enough to rise above the steady patter of rain. I retrieved the jar, corked it gently, and slipped out. Behind me, his humming turned into a tune. The bread smelled better already. Next, Mrs. Casilda. Her window had been dim for too long, the lamp flickering against cloth and tired eyes. I climbed to her sill, balancing lightly, and set down window bread. The jar I'd captured when sunlight had poured straight across her sewing table weeks ago. When I uncorked it, the beam leapt out eagerly, stretching across her cloth. It spilled over scissors, needles, and spools of thread until her whole workspace glowed golden. She gasped, her hands rising to her lips. "Oh my goodness." The cloth beneath her fingers brightened into rich blues and reds, no longer dulled by gray. Her scissors sparkled. The tired lines around her eyes softened as she bent closer, smiling. How beautiful. It feels like working in the window of summer again. Her voice carried warmth I hadn't heard all week. She reached toward me, not to shoo me away, but to stroke my head. Her hand smelled faintly of thread and lavender soap. "Thank you, Pipkin," she whispered, as though she had always known my name. I pressed my head into her palm, then corked the jar when the light curled back, satisfied. Her shop no longer looked dreary. It looked alive. Then the children. They had gathered in a playroom at the bottom of the alley, too wet to be outside. Their chalk drawings had washed away. Their skipping ropes sat abandoned. They huddled near the window, staring gloomily at puddles. I crept in through the cracked door, my tail high, carrying leaf coin and sparrow wing. The children turned as I placed the jars on the floor. "What's the cat doing?" one boy asked. "Shh," said another girl, eyes wide. I nudged the corks loose. The beams spilled out with a playful shimmer. Leaf coin dappling the walls with golden freckles, sparrow wing flickering in tiny bursts like wings mid-flight. The room bloomed with light, warm and joyful. The children gasped. One girl clapped her hands, laughing as freckles of light danced across her arms. A boy spun in circles, chasing the flickers as though they were butterflies. Soon the room rang with laughter again, bright as bells. "It's magic!" a boy cried. "No," said the smallest girl, hugging her knees with a secretive smile. "It's Pipkin." Their joy filled the room so completely that even the rain outside seemed to hush, as though listening. My whiskers quivered with pride. Word spreads quickly among humans, faster even than pigeons. By the next morning, when I stepped onto the rooftops, I noticed heads lifting toward me with curiosity and warmth. The baker opened his door and left a saucer of cream on the step. "For our sunshine cat," he said softly, glancing up at the roof where I sat. Mrs. Casilda leaned out her window, calling gently, "Pipkin, if you ever wish to nap in my shop, there'll be a basket waiting." The children shouted my name in alleys, inviting me to play as though I were one of them. Everywhere I went, people no longer saw just a stray cat darting along chimneys. they saw the little bringer of light. Their smiles, rare just days ago, now bloomed as soon as they spotted me. I still returned each night to my attic, curling among my glowing jars. My library of dawn trembled softly, waiting. They were no longer just mine. Each jar was a promise, a way to mend weary moments, a way to return brightness to gray days. And oh, the joy it gave me, deeper than the thrill of climbing rooftops, richer than the warmth of sunlight on my fur. It was joy with roots, spreading through me like vines. The knowledge that what I had gathered in secret was now shining in the lives of others. I am Pipkin, collector of dawn, keeper of jars, and now bringer of light. And perhaps for the first time I felt that my paws carried not only myself across the rooftops, but the quiet happiness of the whole neighborhood. At last, the week of rain ended. The morning broke with a clear, silver stillness, as though the sky had been washed overnight. Then came the first slice of sunlight, golden and sure, spilling over the rooftops like a ribbon unfurled just for me. My whiskers twitched, my paws itched to climb. I darted out the loose window latch, up the fire escape, across the chimney path I knew by heart, until I stood on my favorite rooftop, the skillet. Wide, sun-baked, and honest, it greeted me as an old friend. The whole town sparkled below. Roofs steamed faintly as water dried. Windows glowed like coins. Pigeons preened in the warmth, and even the cobblestones looked polished. I closed my eyes and let the sun sink into my fur, slow and generous. After days of gray, the warmth felt like a feast. For a moment, I thought about gathering, about chasing beams between chimneys, capturing puddles of gold in my jars. My attic shelves were half emptied now, the jars I had shared still glowing faintly in neighbors' homes. But as I sat there, tail curled neatly around my paws, a new thought filled me. The beams did not belong only to me. They belonged everywhere. I opened my eyes. On the baker's windowsill, a jar I had left glowed brightly, spilling warmth across his counter. He lifted a loaf of bread into the light and laughed, the sound carrying up to me. At Mrs. Casilda's table, another jar shone steady, making her scissors gleam as she worked. She hummed softly to herself, the tune lilting like thread pulled through fabric. In the alley, children skipped beneath dapples of light I had scattered, their laughter sharper and brighter than it had been in days. And then I saw it, a single empty jar, set carefully on a stoop near the seamstress's shop. Another rested beside the bakery door, and another near the fountain where the children played. Glass jars, clean and waiting. My heart thumped, a pleased rhythm. They knew. The townsfolk knew I would come. They trusted me to fill their jars with sunlight, to leave little pieces of dawn where gray might return. I padded across the rooftops, leaping chimney to chimney. At each stop I set down one of my jars, milk gold, sparrow wing, tea steam, on sills and stoops. I lifted corks gently, letting the beams stretch, curl, and settle, leaving behind their patient glow. Then I retrieved the empty jars, tucking them into a pouch of sorts in my path, knowing I would fill them on the next clear morning. It became a rhythm, a dance, no longer secret collecting, but sharing. The town and I had made a quiet agreement. They would leave me their empties, and I would return them brimming with sun. As I worked, I noticed something wonderful. People had begun watching for me. A child pointed up at the roofline and whispered, "It's Pipkin." The baker bowed his head in thanks when I set a jar near his flour sacks. Mrs. Casilda smiled at me as if she were in on the secret of the whole world. I was no longer just a stray cat darting over rooftops. I was their bringer of light, their guardian of small dawns. By late afternoon, when the sun hung heavy in gold, I returned to the skillet. My paws were tired, but my heart felt wide. Below me the town shimmered with jars on window sills, each glowing like a star caught before nightfall. The rain had left memory puddles in the street, and the jars made them glimmer as though the town itself had learned to sparkle. I stretched luxuriously, letting the sunlight pour into every stripe of fur, into every whisker. Then I curled down on the warm tiles, nose tucked against my tail. The world no longer felt gray. Even when the next rain came, I knew there would be jars waiting, and I would be there to fill them. My secret collection was no longer secret. It was a gift, and I had become its keeper. As the town settled into its evening hum, I closed my eyes. The warmth of the sun still pressed into me. The skillet roof cradled me as if it had always been mine, a rooftop of my own. I purred, content. Pipkin, guardian of light. Pipkin, rooftop cat. Pipkin, happy. And with that I let the sun carry me into dreams, knowing tomorrow would bring more beams to chase, more jars to fill, more joy to share. The rooftops were mine, yes, but the light, oh, the light was for everyone. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night until next time.